Greetings, students. I hope everyone is doing well. So this continues our lecture series for medical microbiology. This is topic 13, which is all about the immune system, and I will be doing this one in 3 parts. So part 1 has to do with innate immunity. So before we really get into it, I just want to say that the immune system is very complex. There's quite a few things that I will not be covering in these lectures, and quite a few things in the textbook that will not be covered in the lectures. You will get a little bit about the immune system in your anatomy and physiology class, and a little bit in some of your other classes. We're really just going through the basics. So don't get too worried if it seems really complex, because it is. If you take a look at this slide, you can see it's talking about how the immune system has many jobs. It needs to communicate, kill enemies, be on standby, fight worms, inflammation, fever, all sorts of things. There are many different cell types, at least 20 types, and each of these cell types has at least 4 or more jobs. It is a very complex system. So some of these things we'll be talking about, but not all. So I usually do this on the board when we have a board, but we don't have a board today. So I want to talk about what we're covering today in topic 13, part 1, which is the innate immune system. So innate. This means something that you're born with. It's not specific to any particular pathogen, and because it's not specific, it's also very fast. It can react almost immediately. If you take a look at the innate immune system, we're talking about 2 parts. The first line of defense is physical barriers, of which mostly we're going to be talking about what is going on at the skin. The second line of defense is more chemical or cellular, so we're talking about WBC, by that I mean white blood cells, and some various chemical responses. Next lecture, topic 13-2, we will be talking about adaptive immunity. This is something that has memory, and it learns. It's an evolving part of your immune system. So you get exposed to something the first time you get sick, maybe the second time you don't get sick because of the memory of this immune system. And it tends to be a little bit slower. We're talking about days. So this involves specialized cells, B cells and T cells, and something we've already talked about called antibodies. So more on this later. So the first line of defense, like I said, we're really talking about mostly the skin and a few other things that are often related to the skin as well. So first thing about the skin, if you think about it, it covers a large part of your body, and so it's very naturally a first line of defense. It is relatively elastic. We have collagen in our skin that makes it kind of bouncy, so it's resistant to mild jabs. If pathogens get past the skin, this can be a portal of entry. The skin has many secretions. One of the things you probably know is that your salt is your sweat is kind of salty. And what does salt do? This makes the environment relatively hypertonic, and a lot of organisms cannot grow in salty conditions. The big exception being Staphylococcus organisms. Hope you like the little cartoon over here that I found on the internet. I didn't draw that one. Another thing on the skin is something called sebum. So sebum is an oil that we make out of our glands, and it is partially antimicrobe, especially inhibits a lot of fungi. It's also a little bit acidic, so that also helps inhibiting a lot of organisms growing on our skin. Another thing that we have in our skin and also in our blood are these things called defensins. So there is IN again, that means a protein. You can also call these antimicrobial peptides. So these are little peptides, meaning they're short sequences of amino acids, and these things here they interact with microorganisms, and particularly they interact with a lot of gram-negative organisms because they have that extra membrane. So you can see in the diagram on the right, there's a little defensin, the little peptide. It's interacting with the cell's membrane and causing a pore to form. So we also have these things in our body called the mucus secreting membranes. These are kind of like skin. They're not as many layers, and they are mucus secreting, meaning they're moist, and they line quite a number of our physiological systems. So you can see the respiratory, urinary, digestive, and reproductive systems. And they have a lot of the similar secretions as skin. including mucus. Mucus, of course, will trap microorganisms and not allow them to carry on. They also have these things here called dendritic cells that are just beneath their surface. We'll talk about those in a moment as well. And some of these have mechanical defenses, so we're going to talk about these cilia. First thing to talk about is lysozyme. Lysozyme actually is an enzyme that humans have studied for a long time. It's found in your tears, it's found in your blood, found in some secretion of your mucous membranes. And it's a very small protein, and you can see what it says here, that it cuts bonds in the peptidoglycan. So take a look at this. Here's our peptidoglycan, here's our lysozyme. It's an enzyme, kind of looks like Pac-Man. It goes in, cuts up the bonds, and you can see there's holes in the peptidoglycan. This is particularly effective against gram-positives. Remember, gram-positives have that extra thick layer of peptidoglycan, and when you have more peptidoglycan, you are more susceptible to this enzyme lysozyme. I also mentioned these things called dendritic cells. So if you take a look, here's our epithelial layer. This is looks like it's supposed to be the gut. We've got these little guys here called dendritic cells, and they basically can crawl around, and they're a little bit like watchdogs. They crawl around and look for things that are not normal. So they're like little security guards or little watchdogs. Here's what a dendritic cell looks like. You can see it has all sorts of projections and arms, and these things literally move around. They are mobile cells. They can crawl around and look for things. So how do dendritic cells work? So here's a little cartoon. So it says they basically move around and they find things, and like I said, things that are unusual. So sometimes you're looking at dead cells and other things. They could be bacteria that have made it inside your skin due to a scratch or something like that. And basically they go and they gobble it up through a process called phagocytosis. Then what happens? Well, if some of these things that they're gobbling up tend to be bacteria, then they're going to recognize that as something that's not part of the human body, so something foreign. So what they do is they will take them, they'll digest them, and hold on to some of them. You can see in here it's talking about receptors inside recognizing the bacteria. So this pink thing here, this is the receptor right here, and I guess this is the bacteria. You can see the lightning bolts are representing a signal being sent out. So what kind of signal? It's a signal on the surface of the cell, and the cell says, hey, the rest of the immune system, come check this out. So it will recruit other immune cells. So like I said, it's like a security guard, and it's going to attract other immune cells, which we will talk about later and in the next unit. I also mentioned there were mechanical defenses. So a big part of our mechanical defenses is this muco, so muco for mucus, ciliary for cilia, escalator. So take a look here on the left. You can see this diagram of all these cilia. Remember cilia, we talked about them when we were talking about protists, is that these are little projections that actually can move cells around. In this case, these are not moving cells around, they're actually moving mucus around. I'll show you there's an animation here. There's the animation. You can see this is down basically your windpipe, and we have a bunch of mucus there. So microbes will sometimes, on dust particles and otherwise, fall down and get into our respiratory system. And this mucociliary escalator basically pushes them. They get trapped in mucus and they get pushed all the way up and back out. And you know, this happens all the time. We obviously notice it a lot more when we're sick because we produce a lot more mucus, and that's when you really notice it. But this is happening all the time. Another mechanical defense is your lacrimal apparatus. So if you take a look here on the left, you can see we've got these glands, and these glands are producing lots of fluid, which is basically tears. And in this case here, it's flushing your eye. It actually gets drained out through your sinuses, out the back of your nose. Again, something you don't normally notice unless you're sick or unless your eyes are watering, then you're producing a lot more fluid. This is also a path of entry for pathogens. You can imagine if you have allergies and you don't wash your hands and you scratch your eyes, you could be giving yourself an infection just simply from scratching your eyes and introducing the organisms to your sinuses by scratching your eyes. So lastly, part of things that are on your skin are other microbes, of course, so our normal flora. And these can protect us from other organisms from growing on our skin or in other places in our body. How do they protect us? First of all, they occupy niches that other pathogens might occupy. You can see a little cartoon here. You've got this big green guy, and he says, "Hey, get off our turf." And the little purple guy says, "Oh, there's no place for me." Secondly, by producing acids. So a number of organisms produce acidic environments. I'd mentioned lactobacillus is a good organism that is a natural part of the vagina, which produces acids and makes it inhospitable for quite a number of other organisms. Another thing they produce are these things called bacteriocins. I can't remember whether we talked about these or not, but again, we've got IN on the end, and so that means this is another protein, and this is a protein that will inhibit other bacteria from growing. So there's our first line of defense. We got all of these things. Some things I haven't talked about. You can see stomach acid. I'm not going to cover everything, but mostly we've got skin, secretions, and then of course our normal flora, which are the good guys. So let's talk about the second line of defense. The second line of defense is mostly stuff that happens in the blood. So we're talking about a few different processes: blood cells, antimicrobial chemicals. So we already talked about these peptides. We're not going to talk about the complement or the interferons this semester. And we're also talking about processes, inflammation and fever. We're mostly going to be talking about inflammation. So you probably know a little bit about blood cells. There's actually quite a few types. We're not going to be talking about these ones over here. So you can see a big X on this side of the graph. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch here. You can see they're involved in the adaptive response, so most of those will be talked about in next lecture. And then some are involved in the innate response, although there is some overlapping in their abilities. So a whole bunch of different types. So let's talk about these white blood cells. White blood cells, by the way, are also known as leukocytes. So know that word. Let me just show you. I have stars beside these ones. These are the ones that I want you to know. The lymphocytes we're going to be talking about in the next lecture regarding adaptive immunity. Down here at the bottom, we've already talked about the dendritic cells. We're also going to talk about these macrophages and these eosinophils. So these are involved in, you can see it says phagocytosis and non-phagocytic killing. So we'll talk about those two things right now. We did talk about phagocytosis briefly when we were talking about dendritic cells, by the way. So what is phagocytosis? This is where one cell basically eats another in a process where its membrane literally forms a giant hole and engulfs the other one. So you can see that little cartoon there at the bottom. We have a phagocyte. Cyte means cell. Phago means eating. So phagocytosis means the process of eating another cell. So how does this work? Basically, the first step is something called chemotaxis. So what does that mean? It means that one cell is attracted to another place, usually due to some sort of chemical. It could be a histamine, it could be all sorts of things that are attracting that cell. Food, depending on what its role is in the body or in the environment. So you can see here's the phagocyte, and it's crawling along, detects some sort of chemical. It moves along by amoeboid movement, which means its whole cytoplasm is going to change shape. And there it is, crawling along. These projections they make are called pseudopodium. Pseudo means fake. Podium means foot. So that's a fake foot that it's producing. So next thing is the attachment, so it grabs onto whatever its target is. You can see in this case here we've got some little bacteria, and the bacteria are being engulfed or at least attached to the phagocyte. Some are a little more resistant. If they have capsules or slime layers, it makes it a little harder for the phagocyte to grab on. The next step is ingestion. So this membrane here basically grows, it gets a little bit bigger, and eventually surrounds the bacteria and makes this thing here called a phagosome. Again, there's that word. Phago, which means eating, and zome means body. Then it gets digested, so this organelle here is called a lysosome. We talked about that in the first week of classes. It contains enzymes, and those enzymes are basically put into the phagosome, and they and they digest whatever's in there. And so you end up with some broken down products. Lastly, the broken down invader is released. And it's released in many different ways. Sometimes it's released just into the bloodstream, and so we could have the risk of endotoxins. Other times, some things like dendritic cells, they actually hold on to pieces. This is called antigen presentation. We're kind of just talking about a little bit in this class. This is important for adaptive immunity. It's kind of like the security guard is holding on to the perpetrator and waiting for the other parts of the immune system to come take a look. Here's some electron micrographs of some phagocytosis in action. You can see on the left we've got some bacteria are getting attacked, and on the right we have a yeast cell, which is just a little bit smaller than the phagocyte, is about to get engulfed. So there is another type of cellular defense that does not involve phagocytosis. In some cases, you can see here in this diagram, I have a tumor cell, and this tumor cell is huge. So yes, the immune system will attack tumor cells, and so that's actually a really important part of the immune system. We'll talk about a little bit more with adaptive immunity. So notice this immune cell is not big enough to destroy the tumor cell by phagocytosis. So it's going to use a type of killing called non-phagocytic killing, and it's also called cytotoxic killing. I can't remember whether I have that on this slide, but you can think about it a little bit like a kiss of death. So there's our cell. This is called the natural killer cell, meaning that it is naturally able to go and destroy other cells. It doesn't need other immune molecules to help it turn it on. It's ready to destroy this tumor. So here it goes. We've got the killer cell. Notice inside the killer cell are these little vesicles full of toxins. So here it goes. It's going to attach to the target cell. Kiss of death. And now these granules full of toxins are going to get released into the target cell, and the target cell will be killed. No phagocytosis required. Like I said, sometimes things are just too big. Tumor cells, worms, you can imagine all sorts of pathogens that may be too large for the immune cells to actually destroy directly by phagocytosis. So here's one of these cells that do this. These are the eosinophils. We talked about those already. Notice all the granules inside the cell that is full of these toxins. And these are an important type of cell to know because they are involved heavily in allergic reactions. They're also involved in reactions that deal with parasitic worms. Let's see if I can write this. This is not easy to do with the mouse. Parasitic. I should have just wrote worms. So yeah, the same part of your immune system that causes allergy is the same part of the immune system that deals with parasitic worms. So this is important, especially if you're interested in allergies and allergy research. So here's a picture of a fluke that is much too large for those immune cells to kill by phagocytosis. You can see those immune cells have surrounded it and they're injecting toxins and they're killing this worm. Don't feel sorry for the worm. So there are other chemical defenses in the blood. We talked about lysosome, we talked about defensins. We're not going to worry about the complement system or interferons this semester, just to keep things simple because we are going to run out of time. We do want to talk about inflammation though, very important immune response. Inflammation is kind of a general, non-specific response when you have some sort of damage. So you can imagine you get a scratch or a bug bite or something like that, you've damaged some tissue, and the whole idea is we want to bring in nutrients, we want to bring in immune cells, and we want to fix up and repair what's going on in that little scratch. So if the inflammation is acute, meaning fast and short-lived, it's usually beneficial. We've got blood, oxygen, immune cells in there cleaning things up. Sometimes we end up with chronic inflammation, and this is where things are a problem. And this is where you can have collateral damage to other tissues. You can end up with things like arthritis and a variety of other symptoms. So what's going on in inflammation? So you can see here are some blood capillaries, and we've got blood going in and blood leaving the area, and this is what is normally happening. So you get a little poke, a little bit of damage, and what happens is our tissues release histamines, and the histamines say, hey, okay, let's open this thing up. So if you take a look on the right, we have after the inflammation, we've got all those blood vessels are much wider, so you can get increased amount of oxygen, increased amount of immune cells that can come and help in the healing process. Here's another picture. You can see the constricted blood vessel, and on the right we can see the one that has getting exposed to the histamines. You can see these white blood cells. These immune cells here are able to come and kind of try to clean things up. This could include dendritic cells looking for bacteria and other debris. A variety of other cells are coming. Sometimes we end up with a little bit of pus with inflammation, and that's mostly our white blood cells and lymphatic fluids. So it says here, inflammation, nutrients help to speed up tissue repair. Here's a little acronym to remember the symptoms of inflammation. SHARP, so S for swelling, H for heat, R for redness, P for pus and pain. One more diagram showing inflammation all in one step. You can see here is our object. Looks like a thorn. It is puncturing our skin. We've got these histamines that are being released. We've got those phagocytes are being recruited, and ultimately these bacteria are going to get destroyed. If it gets bad, there may be a further immune reaction, or in some cases there might be an allergy. Some people are allergic to insect bites, such as mosquito bites, and that's no fun either. Okay, so that is it for topic 13, part 1. Like I said, this is a bit of an abbreviated lecture. I'm trying to keep everything a little bit shorter than usual. Obviously, they'll be a lot shorter without the discussion, but I'm hoping to make these videos, nice 20 to 30 minutes max, so they're approachable and easy to watch in one sitting. Feel free to email me with any questions, and any comments as well would be appreciated. Here's a little table that I found that kind of talks about the first line of defense and the second line of defense, and kind of gives a list of a bunch of those things that we talked about. So please take a look at it, download the PowerPoint, and go over these things carefully. There's some terminology for you. Remember, we didn't cover the complement system. Just looking to see what else we didn't cover. Interferons, and we did cover everything else. I didn't addressly say the word vasodilation. I'm hoping you know it. If not, spend a little bit of time on Google. Study questions, take a look at these, and hopefully they'll help you prepare for the final exam. I wish all of you a wonderful day.